Hello, everybody. So I think this has been an amazing day. I've been a little bit here and a little bit watching on Twitter, but it's quite clear that the people in the audience and the people on the stage are in many ways the ambassadors of responsible tech. And thank you, Doteveryone, for kind of getting us all together, because what I'm hoping is that after today, we all think of some even more tangible and in some cases maybe ruthless ways that we can be not just encouraging but enforcing more responsible tech. So today, I'm kind of really thrilled that we get to close, or not close, because obviously this is not the close, but the last panel of the day. And instead of me asking questions the whole way through, what I thought was, I've seen some great questions on Slido, so actually let's use you all a bit more. And so I'm going to ask them a few questions, and then we're going to hand over, you said that they were going to be honest, oh yes, and then I'm going to hand over really to you guys to help us drive this conversation so we can come to a conclusion at the end of maybe some key takeaways that we can in action, and then tell the Doteveryone team if they worked or not. So let's start with Francesca Bria, who, as you all know, is the Cto of Barcelona, which I just don't understand how that even, I mean, that's an incredible feat. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you make sure that you do so responsibly.
Thank you. So it's great to be here. I think this is an absolutely critical conversation, and I spend lots of my time to convince policymakers that we have to take this very seriously. So for me, of course, it's not just about responsible technology. This is about at the core of what we do, at least in government and politics. There cannot be a democratic, inclusive digital city if it's not responsible, if it doesn't have ethics and human rights at the core, which also means actually the rule of law and making sure we keep democracy, continue, to be the system we live in. So we take this conversation and this topic very, very seriously. So I tell you a bit what I do, and then what we do in cities to make sure that we propose a technology agenda that has human rights, ethics and responsibility at the center. So I'm basically in charge of the digital city policy of Barcelona, from digital transformation, which means how we use technology to make a government more open, more collaborative, and more transparent, and in particular more open to the participation of citizens. So at the very core, what we do is running a large-scale participatory democracy movement in the city of Barcelona, where we have lots of different ways to engage citizens into the creation and into the policy-making process of the city. We work a lot on data, and we are working on creating a data commons that help citizens to take back democratic control of data, and I will tell you more about that in the conversation. And also, I work on digital innovation, which means how do we work, how do we create a digital ecosystem with startups, with innovators, with SMEs, cooperatives, and citizens themselves that are able to work with the city to address our urban challenges. And so we have urban innovation labs, fab labs, maker spaces, all kind of like innovation engines. And then we do skills empowerment and training, because of course, this is super important, and also it's very important to work with schools and making sure we bring the entire system basically up to speed on how we can achieve this. And for me, there are three main points about this topic. The first thing is trust. So I think for us, we have no choice. We have to rethink the way we do policy and reshape the relationship between citizens and governments. So let's say that the big tech and the concentration of power that we see right now, I mean, some people talk about surveillance capitalism, but in general, the concentration of power we see now, it's not helping us to move away from all the problems and the challenges that we have, but it's exacerbating the problems. And so we see a lack of trust, we see danger for even liberal democracy. And so basically, if we want that trust to be there, we have to change the way we do things. The other really important issue is public value. So we think that if we, for instance, create data commons, if we give people the ability to govern their data, to decide, how they want to keep their data private, if we have encryption as a human right, if we have more transparency in the way that also we use technology, which means infrastructure and so on, we can generate more public value. And for cities, this is absolutely critical because we run public services and we, together with other stakeholders in the ecosystem, we have to ensure that the city runs well. And finally, my third point is sustainability. So we want to move away from unsustainable business model, and I think responsible technology and ethical technology will make sure that we get there. Right. So the first point is moving away from systems that monetize and commercially exploit and manipulate personal data to pay for critical infrastructures. So this is not working. We want to find other business models. And again, for cities, this is very important because we are talking about housing, transportation, waste management, energy transition, all the things that people care about.
Yeah, it's awesome. As you were talking, there's some really great, I was thinking up questions, and then everyone in the audience was thinking up questions as you were going. So we're going to have to come back to those once we've introduced the others. What I did want to just say to the audience was if you want to ask your question yourself, make sure you put your name and then I'll call you out and a mic will come to you. If it's as written as anonymous, we will let you remain anonymous and I will read that out for you, just so you know. So, Czech, I know you in many different guises, but tell the audience a little bit about how you see this and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm Czech Warner. I'm the co-founder and CEO of something called Diversity VC, which is a non-profit dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in tech in all of its forms and in VC. It really came from a personal observation of having joined an industry where I was just pretty much horrified at the fact that the allocators of capital were just the same. It was just this crazy homogeneity to me, and also the companies that they were allocating that capital to reflected that. So together with 4 other people who were kind of junior in the VC industry, we formed this group. And we kind of thought about 4 things that we really wanted to see change. The first was data. So let's find out what's going on today. There was not even one list of the number of funds in the UK when we started, let alone who was actually working in the funds. The second was, how do people get into this industry? It's so network driven. You don't necessarily need qualifications to be a VC, but yet most people in it are Ivy League university or Oxbridge. So we run an internship program where we help people from disadvantaged backgrounds and diverse backgrounds get into the industry. The third is VCs themselves. How can VCs be more inclusive? So we run a training course and we have a toolkit for VCs to help them change in every aspect of their work. And then the fourth is entrepreneurs. How do entrepreneurs from all kinds of different backgrounds actually access capital? So we've been working on that since March of 2017. We've done a whole bunch of studies. We did the first ever study on the number of women in VC, which showed that 2/3 of funds had no senior women in their investment teams. Half of funds had no women in their investment teams. Just kind of shocking situation, just looking at one aspect of diversity. And so that's kind of the angle that I come at this responsible sort of tech question from. But I think part of that inclusivity is actually looking at many other aspects of how to be responsible. I think mental health is something that we're just not talking about anything like enough. And it's a related topic.
And I have to ask, how many VCs have gone through your training process?
We've had 22 partners so far at some of the top funds that you will have heard of. Which has been fascinating. Even pinning a VC down for an hour is hard. Getting them to commit a whole day to diversity and inclusion, social justice training was an interesting thing to try to persuade them to do.
Yeah. And how did you persuade them to do it? There's this kind of, are we meant to be shaming people into doing it? Are we meant to be encouraging them into doing it? Like, how did you actually get them to think that this was something to spend a day on?
I think it was a combination of peer pressure. So getting one kind of very credible big name was helpful to then kind of encourage the others to come along. I don't love the idea of shaming people and making people feel like it's a negative thing, because actually what we really genuinely believe is that if we get this right, it is going to help all of us in this whole community. We can create more value
Yeah.
if the VC funds are more kind of alert and aware to the opportunities that exist outside of their sort of standard networks. They can make a hell of a lot of money. And so that was the argument we were trying to use to persuade them to come along.
Yeah, I like the idea of a founder saying, I'm not actually accepting your money unless you've done the course.
Well, genuinely, one of the things that was in Tabitha's great sort of briefing note to us was what are the practical things that people can do today? And I think if you're a founder in the room, saying to your VC, have you done inclusion training? Have you done social justice training? What are your policies around inclusion? Especially if they're kind of chasing after you and wanting to invest in your company, you are in this incredibly powerful position to dictate how they behave and how they change. And I think until the founders actually change that dynamic and ask that question, it's not going to be so quick for the VCs to change.
Yeah, awesome. So that takes us on to introducing Rob McCargow, who is at PwC looking after artificial intelligence. One of the things that I find challenging when we come to this is corporates often talk about responsibility in a silo over here as the sort of corporate social responsibility. How have you seen that change, and how do we make sure that companies see it as core to every single thing that they're doing rather than something for a team in another part of the building? Oh, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Solve the world's problems at the same time.
So just very quickly, in terms of scale, we have 250,000 staff, around 159 countries. The amount of impact that technology such as AI will be profound, and therefore we've got a job of work in order to kind of transform ourselves from within. So we've got a huge team now starting to apply technology to internal use cases, but take that learning and start applying it to clients across all sectors, to governments, etc. I've also been quite heavily involved with the policy development side of things on the advisory board of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI, which you've been part of yourself, Tabitha, and also the IEEE's Global Ethically Aligned Design Initiative. The thing I'm probably most known for, though, are late-night rants on Twitter about things like Sophia the robot,
yes.
Who, if anyone's followed Twitter today, this latex monstrosity has spawned a little sister called Little Sophia.
Or hasn't spawned.
I don't know what's happened to this thing. But anyway, that's my latest rant for the next few months ahead. But I think, back to the earlier question, I mean, I think I go to a lot of conferences, and we're very, very proud to support Rachel and Martha and the team here on this one. I think it's moving the dial. I think many of these are simply just trade shows, pressing the flesh and driving business without thinking of the ramifications here. So I think there's a very small number, and I include CognitionX in that as well, and Sue's Tech UK event. I think we've got to be honest, though, who's in the room today?
Yeah.
The corporates aren't here. The big tech firms aren't here in the main, with a few exceptions. And there's obviously Lloyd's and BT and folk like that here, brilliant. But it's not mainstreaming enough yet, is it? I'm from the business. I'm not from just the CSR department alone. And Bridget is here doing brilliant work and stolen all my thunder on her 3-minute lightning talk earlier. But until this is mainstreamed in business and not seen as a kind of an afterthought, then we can have brilliant conferences like this, but we're not going to shift the dial sufficiently.
Right. So
I think the impact on this is so profound now that we have to start finding clever ways of getting big business into the tent so that they can start hardwiring this into their thinking to turn it around to competitive advantage. And I think there's already starting to see the signs of this happening around things like talent. I think there's some interesting parallels as well, Czech, with talent here, isn't there? We're starting to see the very best talent we want starting to challenge us on our lofty purpose and ideals. How do you actually carry through with this? And I think that's starting to become mainstream in that respect. I think there's also some things there that we know that we've got a duty of care to propagate, and that's things like the impact we can have through our supply chain. And as, for example, the work you guys do, mapping the ecosystem of AI companies. What was the number in London? 750?
yeah.
750 AI companies in London alone as of last June.
Yeah.
How many of those are truly AI? I doubt it's the majority. But when these are being commissioned to do work, how many clients are saying, what do you do about gender diversity in your workforce? What do you do around ethical frameworks? how can you give us the confidence that you're adhering to responsible tech techniques? So I think big business has a profound impact on the way that this revolution will take hold, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I agree. I think the question that has had 14 thumbs up about how do we make responsibilities stick has been echoed across all three of you. In the brackets it says here, is it incentives, regulation, or cultural change? Because clearly pledges aren't enough. Francesca, you were talking about having to convince policymakers and think about human rights. Where do you fall on whether this is something that you can do by sheer will versus you're going to need more regulation?
Right, so I think regulation and laws are important, so I wouldn't underestimate the impact that they can have even in turning privacy, security, basic rights into a competitive advantage. For instance, if we take the regulation like GDPR, I know that maybe many in the room think, okay, is this very effective? No, but I think it is a very good framework combined with other things that are happening in the EU around, antitrust, the question of a digital tax, the question of trying to regulate, what is possible to do. It's helping to create a general framework and laws, so that laws that can be enforced. So for that you need governments and you need a very solid framework. I think we need to go beyond that. So regulation is not enough. You need to build alternatives, and of course you need to work with businesses, with organizations, and so on to make sure that they provide those solutions that are able which are also infrastructures, tools, technologies that work in a different way. I think at the city level, two things. First of all, of course, it's not a technological change here. We're talking about a big organizational change and also a cultural shift. So you have to give incentives, in a sense. What we are doing in Barcelona is we created a regulation, we have a data directive, and also we have ethical digital standards for the city hall, where we mandate for encryption, decentralization, transparency, open standards, free software. We provide incentives and trainings for the staff to learn about it. We created a lot of organizational change. We appointed a chief data protection officer. We appointed an entire team that learns and know what it means to run privacy impact assessments and data protection assessment on everything we do in the city. I mean, we spend around 80 million per year on technology. I mean, it's maybe a tiny budget compared to what you spend, but it involves a lot of people, and also we provide services, and now we are changing the way we deliver services, really putting technology, ethics, transparency, and human rights at the core. And so this involves, it's a big organizational change, and you have to be committed politically. And one thing that I think it's very interesting also for businesses is that we are changing procurement laws also according to that. So we have done a big procurement reform. I know, sorry about the unsexy word, but this is what governments do. We spend your money, and we deliver services, and we buy a lot of technology. And so now we're not only mandating for environmental standards, gender standards, and social standards in the way we do procurement, but also we have data sovereignty standards and ethical technology standards, which really are changing the way we buy technology. So now, for instance, regarding data, whatever service we buy in the city of Barcelona, the provider is obliged to give back the data to the city hall in machine-readable format, encrypted, so privacy and security by design, and this data belongs to all the citizens of Barcelona. It's a common good. It's not anymore, it cannot be used only by the providers to do all kind of businesses. And then we want to work with companies to say, right, and it has to be transparent, the way that we do these big bids and this big public buying of technology, but also the way that you access to data. We have to to make that much more transparent. I want to know what happens with my data, who is using the data, for what purpose, and we want to reestablish a new social pact on data, really based on this. So these are a lot of things that you can do to create incentives at a organizational way. We need regulation and laws. I mean, code of ethics are not enough. We want to enforce those, and I think the European, and I know, sorry, Europe is not very popular here in the UK as a topic, but you know, I think on this way we are showing the way. I mean, actually, a lot of people say Europe is lagging behind. You know, this is a big deal between the US, big Silicon Valley companies, and China. But I think that Europe is actually putting forward a different kind of framework that it's people-centric, that has human rights at the core, and that can create benefit and public value and redistribute this value through the whole society. Yeah. And yeah, why not?
You're definitely in. I imagine a very Europe-loving audience. I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. Now, one of the questions that flashed up, but that isn't on the screen right now, was around best practice that we can learn from in the UK. And now, clearly, what you've just described to us is best practice, and we should learn. And can we find out about that on your site and those blogs?
Yeah.
Who did you learn from, and how did you get to this structure? Was it trial by error?
The ethical digital standards of Barcelona, and also our procurement guides, and the way we are doing this, it's in a free software platform. We're actually sharing it amongst hundreds of cities. I chair something that's called the CIO's City Global Council. So many other cities are on it. And we're now really sharing these kind of practices and the way we do technology policy at the city level. Even with New York and Amsterdam, we launched the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. You should check it. It's citiesfordigitalrights.org, the website. And there you can see cities are signing manifestos that have this kind of principle: non-discrimination, privacy, security, ethics by design, digital literacy, participatory democracy, ethical digital standards. So cities are working together to make sure that this become part of the way they do technology policy, and then you create an organizational culture, and this is happening. So cities are sharing this. Maybe it's a grassroots movement, it's bottom up, so maybe it can then also get to governments and to big companies as well. So we are sharing, and please have a look and give us feedback. I just wanted to say also one thing. For me, it's very important to communicate that this is not about technology only. So a lot of the work that I'm doing in Barcelona around the smart city is try to explain this to citizens. Right. So I don't want this to become a technocratic project, or even to become something only for technologists, right? I mean, this has a very strong impact on people's daily life when it comes to their mobility, their housing, their energy bills, their social insurance. Democracy itself is very concrete. So instead of explaining people, okay, the technology about it, we should explain how this has a practical impact on their life and get people on board. So I have to say, I really believe that we have to extend this conversation to a broader debate and get people on board. And so what we do is through participatory democracy, we do that. I mean, we are now we're running an experiment where we involve citizens into defining this data ethics and the ethical data strategy of the city of Barcelona, and we do large-scale workshops. People come in, citizens of all kinds. Then we have also experts and policymakers, and then we arrive to a conclusion where they have awareness, because creating awareness, I think, is a very important part.
Yeah. And this all sounds, I mean, amazing. I'm like, tick, tick, tick. But there's a really big question up here which says, and so this kind of participatory democracy sounds awesome. Yeah. But what does it then mean for representative democracy? And I don't know who asked the question, but it's a question that we need to be asking ourselves a lot now. And how do you? Yeah,
I mean, this is a hybrid, what we're trying to experiment. I mean, first of all, as I said before, this is our attempt to give an answer to the lack of trust. People are disenfranchised. They don't believe anymore in the system, in the political system. They don't also believe that businesses are going to solve the problem. They don't definitely believe in banks and in and in big investors. So there is a big lack of trust in the system. And if we don't give positive solutions to that, and we don't engage in a participatory democracy movement in a proper way and articulate it through stronger public policies, we are going to see more of these right-wing nationalists, that are going to get into power and exploit this lack of trust and confusion to create even less democracy. So I think this is a super important thing. And our our way is, okay, we have to trust that we have the mechanisms to do that, making government much more transparent, but really, because we have to fight corruption. For instance, we put all the budget online. We explain citizens how we are spending the money, where we invest the money. We have participatory budgeting experiments. 70% of our city agenda has been shaped directly by citizens. 400,000 citizens participated in the creation of the policy agenda of a city, which is usually very bureaucratic and done under closed door. So we are trying really to open up. And then, of course, it's a hybrid between participatory democracy, more direct democracy elements, and representative democracy. Of course, we are in office being elected. And it's a hybrid between digital and offline democracy. So also that is not just Facebook. You click here, you don't know who owns the data, you don't know who gets access, data are manipulated. No, I mean, we're very transparent. We use different kind of platforms that put trust. That's the thing. It's about creating a different trust also in the system you use. And then we also go in the street and engage with people face to face, because we cannot substitute all through digital.
No, that's really important. And you mentioned, less trust in banks. Trust is probably the conversation that I keep hearing time and time again wherever I've gone for the last sort of few weeks.
We can have more distributed trust.
Well, exactly. We need to be trustworthy, right? So this is what I think is the issue. Is sort of a lot of companies are demanding trust, but you clearly sound as if you're going through the motions to make sure you're actually trustworthy as well. One of the questions that's come up for you, Rob, from the audience is, has the AI been trained to avoid the greed that led to the economic collapse of the American housing crisis? For example. And so I don't need you to answer that question, but the for example, I think, is really important, because if we think of responsible technology about doing good, but what about doing less harm? And actually, how do we help companies think about pointing their tools and talent and all of this incredible technology at doing less bad rather than just more good? Have you got some good examples of where you've seen that happen in corporates? And you can answer that question too, but I'm just not quite sure if you know the...
I mean, the answer is, well, no, it's not, because AI isn't really here yet, is it? It's,
Don't tell them!
Exactly. I think it's interesting around the semantics in this, because, I go to all these conferences, is AI for good, or, does that mean everything else is AI for bad, or is it just AI for neutral? I don't know what the wording means, but clearly...
AI for profit, I think, is the other option.
Yeah, exactly. And as my colleague Bridget was saying, you can have purpose and profit aligned now, and I think that's increasingly something on trend. Where are we at? I mean, I think there's things that are benign. I think there are some things clearly that are malevolent and deleterious. I'm not sure Rashida's still here from AI Now Institute. She is. I asked permission for this earlier, but did anyone see her symposium from last year? The slide of stuff that happened just in 2018 in the world of AI and big tech. It was horrendous. The slide wasn't big enough, was it? I've reproduced it a few times. Self-driving cars killing people, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and the list went on and on and on. And there is already the sign 2019 shaping up to lead to some fairly poor outcomes, and the risk is very real. I think the increasing opportunity this presents to apply emerging tech like AI to use cases of significant consequence is growing by the day. So we are fairly. We do need to move quite fast, and this is where the whole debate with regulation comes up. We've spent 2.5 years twiddling our thumbs to receive no clear position on one of the greatest matters of all time in public policy debate land at the moment. And this is profound, and I don't think we can rely upon regulation alone, although I think it's increasingly important. So I think it's going to be a combination of different factors that will come through. I think there's some good work around standards. I think there's definitely a huge opportunity around professionalisation of the workforce. I mean, it's a well-informed audience. We've seen those awful clips of people at tech conferences who, when challenged on ethics and responsibility, have said, I'm just the engineer, that's not in my job description. And that's got to stop now, hasn't it, increasingly? So I think there's a huge opportunity to change the professional approach to people designing this tech. I think there's also quite an interesting opportunity, and it slightly plays into your world, Czech, as well, around the increased appetite for non-executives and chairs of boards to realise they're not necessarily always the most tech savvy, but they play a huge amount of role in terms of holding their board to account. On the one hand, pushing them fast enough to remain relevant and adopt the tech, but put the right checks and balances in to ask them the hard questions to say, should we really be doing this? And I've seen a huge uptick in running workshops for boards around what do I need to know as a non-techie to ask the right questions here as well. So I think you've got the talent piece, you've got the governance piece, you've got standards, you've got regulation, and then you've got increasingly consumer pressure coming through. Just the start of it, and I think back to Francesca's point around democracy, you and I have spent time in Parliament a lot in the last 2 years, and when asked why so few politicians are engaged in this, they're quite honest. They say our constituents aren't hammering on our door demanding responsible frameworks for technology.
Yeah.
They're kind of kicking door down for other matters at the moment. Although there was a few anecdotes. I think one of the MPs we know quite well, Stephen Metcalfe, said there's just a couple of anecdotal examples of constituents saying, I'd been denied this mortgage due to some system now.
Yeah.
And that's when you start actually moving out of it being a niche technology conversation to a genuine impact on people's lives. So, sorry, Jack, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that has made a massive difference, particularly in the world that I talk about a lot, is the gender pay gap legislation that came in. Yeah. And I don't actually know how long that took from kind of first concept to getting it in, but the conversations that were sparked by that were just incredible. And I think it really woke up people to examining that question, also other questions, being more transparent, talking about it in all of their companies. So it can be amazing, but as you say, we are in kind of current political deadlock, and as much as I'd love there to be, brilliant new policies coming out all the time, I think I'm just not prepared to wait for that to happen. And I think we all need to, act collectively. I think part of why we set up Diversity VC was because we felt there was nothing really for the VC industry that was holding it to account, but also formed by the people who were in it, who could kind of say, look, we get it, it's really difficult and you're busy and things like that, but actually this is important. Yeah. And I think us working together more as collectives and saying, this is what we did, let's share that. There's a new movement called Moving Forward, which came from the US, which is about anti-harassment policies, that's just about to launch in Europe, and everyone's kind of open source their policies, so you can look on the VC fund website and see, okay, I'll take that bit of this and that bit of that. And then, to your point about sort of standards, the B Corp standard, I think, is coming much more into the conversation here. And I'm seeing more companies kind of go through that process and adopting it. And it is a real kind of statement of intent. It's like we've actually bothered to go and get this. It's maybe cost us money, it's cost us time, but as a way of attracting talent and sort of really stating on your kind of front page of your website, this is what we're about, I think it's really effective.
Yeah. Hayden spoke earlier, and there was a question about creating this kind of social responsibility report, like a financial report. Is there anyone in the room that has been involved in like the gender pay gap or the B Corp, the creation of either of those initiatives? Rules? No? I just thought if you did, you could have told us how long it took and what happened and how we can copy it. Okay, so just checking. But I think that question was a good one, maybe back to you. Could that be a way that you could actually do that without needing the government? Because you could just start imposing it, right? Yeah,
I mean, and I think incentives that you raised earlier is really interesting. If you, as a big allocator of capital in some way, are creating incentives to help your sort of just to attract companies who do behave in the right way. So there was the Larry Fink kind of letter that was all about, now profit and purpose, one and the same thing and need to be sort of treated together. And then more recently, a couple of weeks ago in the FT, there was a whole kind of section on this change in attitudes towards maximizing shareholder value is no longer the only thing that matters. I spend time obviously talking to big pension funds and allocators of capital into VC funds, and I'm not kind of seeing enough of those incentives coming through and saying, we're actively out there looking for VCs or for companies that are behaving more responsibly. Yeah, and have you seen? Did you feel a change? I mean, that Larry Fink letter to me. Can we have some nodding? Does everyone know what we mean by the Larry Fink letter? Enough nodding? Do we need to explain it?
No nodding.
No, will you explain it a little bit more? Because I think it's really important. He's the CEO of I think it's the largest asset manager in the world. So trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars under management. And he basically wrote his kind of annual letter to shareholders and said,
I no longer think that maximising value for shareholders is the only thing that matters in the companies that I invest in. I'm looking for those companies to behave ethically and responsibly. And this was a massive departure from every other economist kind of previously.
Is this why he holds shares in Exxon at the same time? Because they're massively invested in
So I think what he had said was that he would no longer invest in new companies, and people asked him about Exxon, and so what had happened was he was like, oh well, don't screw with the baddies. But he had made a promise, which was he wouldn't invest in new. Now, neither of us are saying he's great. We're just saying that it was the first time we'd seen this. I was really shocked. But did you hear about what they did about Exxon? That came up, but I don't know what they did in the end.
No, I don't know, but I think it did precipitate a real shift in people thinking about this is someone whose name means a hell of a lot in the asset management industry, obviously, and he's saying this for the first time. Whether or not he acts on it, obviously, we all need to kind of hold him to account on doing it. Of course, otherwise it's meaningless. But
Loads of time is fine.
12 years, it's fine, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a good segue actually to one of the questions that was on the list around climate. I don't think it's there anymore. But actually, while we're on this topic, how have you seen? And I'll come along. We'll start with Francesca. But how have you seen the conversation around the Earth and literally the fact that we have, in many cases, 12 years until all of the stats actually start to come true? How have you seen that impact your decisions around all the things you've just told me? So procurement, processes, has it yet hit home? Or is it something that you still feel like you need to be explaining to people each time you make a decision?
Well, I think this is a big movement that still needs to happen, and we need a plan that will work. So we need a lot of political will, but also we need a collective movement to make it work. Anyways, I think on this topic of sustainability and the fight against climate change, cities have been very much at the forefront. I have to say, much more than governments. We have been acting, for instance, two examples from Barcelona. One is we have done a very ambitious and radical policy around mobility and urban planning. So we closed to traffic 16 districts of the city. So now the cars can only get around the district, around the block. It's called Barcelona Super Block. And we recuperated 60% of space that before it used to be occupied by cars. And now we call them citizen space. It's public space. And together with urban planners, architects, and designers, we've been redesigning the use of this public space. And now there are kindergartens, there are new different type of businesses that serve the local community, green space, because we also monitoring if that affects the air quality and all kind of, actually also mental issues problems, because this affects a lot. Even pollution and noise and so on affects the mental health. And this is a big plan. We have made triple the number of bicycle lanes in Barcelona, and yeah, we are all for a sustainable mobility. Really fight climate change in a very strong way. We have a municipal energy operator for clean energy, which provides energy from mainly solar energy for all the municipal buildings, and now we have a test of 20,000 private homes as well. All the buses and the municipal transports are electric in Barcelona. We have more than 600 electric chargers. We are doing a big plan to renew. So energy transition for us is very concrete, and climate change is a absolutely important fight. And we work together, like the whole government, also with the health committee. We measure also gentrification when we put up green space, because we don't want the house prices going up. So we also, we're really taking care about the well-being and livable spaces for citizens. But I think this needs to be scaled up. So cities are doing a lot, but of course the big businesses also have to move along, and we need a massive system change. Yeah.
And I think what we've seen, especially I've personally seen in the last few months, is that once consumers get something in their grasp, like plastic straws, plastic bags, and then the government comes up behind and starts taking stuff. There is a movement that can happen, but actually we need to think about the press and the media's role in this. And so on my points of things, if we kind of keep tracking through regulation, the media has got a massive part to play in this. How, Czech, have you sort of seen the media playing into what you're trying to achieve? Is it supportive? Is it often not supportive? Obviously, we've got a wide gamut of different types of media, but can we use it to our advantage?
Yeah, I'm slightly negative on this, I think, because I think people use the media a lot to virtue signal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of, we are at this conference, or we're doing this, or we're doing that, and actually very little substance and very little accountability that's actually followed up on. And I think the problem with the way the media works in the business model is it's just about selling the paper today and it's tomorrow's chip paper, and there's no real interest in following up and saying, did you actually do that thing that you said you were going to do? And what were the results of that initiative that you started? And it's kind of all about headline grabbing. So I agree with you. I think it would be great to see the media playing much more of a role in this, and I think particularly climate change. I mean, I know it's not sort of my topic, but I am horrified at how little, anything's being done about it. And I think you're right. It's about how you engage consumers much more. And again, I just don't see the media really talking to customers and people in a way that makes them feel like they have some ability to impact and influence what's happening.
Yeah.
Because I think until you feel as a customer like, okay, this is something that I can change, this is something I can swap out and it's going to make a difference, it just feels so overwhelming.
Right.
I think that's where the media can actually break things down and be that bridge for people. But I just don't see it happening.
Yeah. And Rob, PwC has done some really interesting work on how AI can help reverse can help the earth, whether it's deforestation I've seen. I love that report. It has in it many, many suggestions for what we could point our tools and talent and tech at. How do we get people to actually start doing that? So rather than seeing the climate change as something that everybody else needs to deal with, but it's actually something that these big tech companies could tackle themselves.
Yeah, I'm sort of massively conflicted on all this in terms of my perspective. I mean, first of all, there has been combining the business and the media bit here. I mean, it's been some amazing action last year with Attenborough and the plastic revolution. There's tangible action that's taken place. Some of the media you would not expect to have got behind that, and that went down phenomenally well. And he went to Davos, and everyone applauded him. And then it transpired there were 1,500 private jets that landed at Davos that week. So, I mean, I wasn't there, and I don't have a private jet. So, were you there? You were there, Tabitha,
I was there, not on a private jet.
That's a shame. Anyway, so I mean, it's like
next time I'm taking a train the whole way.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of with Czech on the virtue signalling side of things. Yeah. But that's not to say that there's very, very real opportunities to harness this tech for good. I don't mean #tech for good. It's actually putting it to use to accelerate progress towards some of these grand challenges. So I think I'm broadly optimistic, but there's a kind of a balancing act between keeping minds focused on the amazing benefits, and Julian does a great job with his awards, highlighting where this is putting into practice. So everyone should get involved in Digital Agenda's tech awards, impact awards. At the same time as constantly using their platform to flag where this stuff is not leading to positive outcomes. And the problem at the moment is that the users and developers of tech have not yet felt the pain and the punishment from this leading to poor outcomes. In fact, they're still benefiting and rewarding from this, despite even the media starting to call out some of this bad practice. So we've got a real balancing act here, haven't we, to see the benefit of what this could do to solve some of these SDGs, for example, or help to solve them, whilst calling out bad practice, irradiating the whole topic of malpractice in the application of tech. And unfortunately, that's still the dominant force at the moment.
But I think it's also worth saying that these platforms can be a real conduit to social movements happening. And we've seen that with the Me Too movement. It really started on Twitter and went through Twitter, and then obviously the media massively amplified that in a really helpful way. But I think if, the social networks can be a really powerful tool for good as well as for bad. So, hopefully we as consumers of them can unite in a more organized way around messages to force those big tech companies and other companies to change.
Yeah, it's like we all kind of need to get on the same bandwagon and push it up the hill all at the same time, but not be doing the virtue signaling, which I think is a really interesting question. There was a lot of that at Davos, I felt, was a lot of people saying, well, we're doing some good over here. Don't look at the fact we've not paid some taxes over here, or don't look at the fact we've not done this. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, I think, of our age, being an age where we have a whole room of people who care about responsible tech. So what I want to do as we're wrapping up is think, we've got a few minutes to just talk about what's the one thing that, doesn't need to be one, but what's the thing that we can, anybody in this room, and we'll go through, anyone in this room can do this afternoon, whether it's around public demand, corporate push, investor push, media, education and skills. What do we do to inspire the general public? What's something that you've been nagging at the back of your head the whole way through the session, and you thought, actually, I know this is what we should get everyone to do?
Well, I also don't think that we should all the time give the responsibility only to the isolated consumer or to the isolated citizen. I actually feel that this is something we should take very seriously from the policy side. I mean, big business for sure. And we should take it as a systemic problem. I mean, we should grasp the systemic impact of this and not just say, well, okay, you can do a little action here and a little action there, because otherwise really then at the end you see that there is no actual change happening. I would say I want to see much more alternatives and incentives for alternatives. I mean, for instance, the topic that I really care about, building distributed privacy-enhancing and rights-preserving technologies. I'm not going to wait for Facebook to come up with that. I think there is enough talent, and we have a lot of innovators, startups, developers, people that are able to come up with alternatives. Maybe just the incentives are not enough to do it. And I think in particular for political participation and citizen engagement, we have to get off platforms that have as a core business model, as I said at the very beginning, the commercial exploitation and manipulation of personal information and personal data. This is very dangerous because the incentives is to see what we have been seeing, and data breaches and data manipulation is just, we will see more and more happening. So I think, for instance, what we're doing in Barcelona there, and now we have the European elections, we have to monitor what is happening and so on, but also build alternatives. I mean, we have an alternative platform, it's open source, it's open standards, it is centralized, has cryptography at the core, it works. I mean, now 60 cities around the world use it, governments are starting using it. We can have a pan-European federated, decentralized, and privacy-enhancing network for citizen participation, and we use that, right? So there are things like this that can be done. And then, the second point from a technology standpoint is democratic control over data. So also that, I think, new institutional forms are emerging, data trusts, data commons, what kind of infrastructures we need to do that. My view is that this is going to be a fundamental question of our future. Who controls the data? Is the big business, is the big state, or is citizens? And the answer should be citizens themselves. They should be able to control data, to decide what data they're going to want to keep private, what data they want to share, with whom, and on what terms. And we have to redefine this social pact on data. And I think this on AI, it will be absolutely critical, because otherwise we will see a concentration of power in many of the critical industries and sectors of our times, from healthcare to education to transportation and so on, where we're going to have very little agency in shaping the future. So I think taking back this democratic agency is what we should do, and what we can do. But yeah, my point would be we need to build practical alternatives for that and experiments. So maybe it's because I think cities are a good place where experiments can actually happen.
But how do we get people to want those credible alternatives? How do we get them to feel like they care about whether they own their own data? How do we get the everyday person to actually think?
Well, he was starting, I think. both
Not a
of
good
them.
example, he
no,
has.
no, but they were starting saying, okay, for instance, non-discrimination and all these kind of things. I mean, now you start seeing, you don't get a mortgage. Okay, why? Because of this and that. The house prices, okay, you should have a way to monitor what is the impact of Airbnb on house pricing. I mean, at least we are asked in government to do that by citizens. So it's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach. Yeah. And you're going to start seeing this coming up more and more. Energy prices, I mean, everything will be actually, it has a very tangible impact. So it's not going to be anymore a discussion about technology, it's going to be a discussion about the political and economic model that we want, and of course, sustainability. Yeah. I mean, the impact on the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Czech, what's your parting shot for the team?
Yeah, well, I think hopefully, or I think everyone here is involved in some way in a company, either by being a consumer of products, by being involved in a company, or maybe being an investor in a company, and effectively you are an investor in a company if you're buying their products. I just think tech has such a potential role of social change and positive social change, and can really help lift people out of really difficult circumstances and transform them. But if we are not able to get those opportunities out to people who really are deserving of them and who do not access them at the moment, then we've kind of failed. And at the moment we are failing. Like 90% of companies that raise money in Europe are all male teams. This is an industry that's growing 5 times faster than the rest of the economy. If we don't get this right in the tech companies, then we really are excluding a huge number of people from this conversation. And so I'd encourage people to first of all understand what their company is doing right now about diversity and inclusion. Ask the questions about the pay gaps, ask the questions about how they're hiring people and what the policies are and how they're being inclusive. And then if they're not, then find some resources. We've got lots on our website. There's a site called inclusionintech.com, which has lots of resources and tools. And there are some really kind of simple takeaways there that you can put in place quite quickly.
Yeah. It reminds me, there was a question earlier around this, which was when people are in quite a vulnerable moment to ask those kind of questions, how do we as a community support them? Like especially a founder who's about to get some money from someone. It's easy to say you should ask, but as an entrepreneur, it's very hard to actually do so. How can we bolster people in a way?
Yeah, I think 2 things. One, there are groups like ours who are constantly advocating and fighting for this. So use people like us.
Would you come to meetings with us?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Love to.
Okay, cool. So you could be like, well, here's our diversity henchwoman. Hench.
Maybe.
Hench Warner.
Diversity, inclusion, the police.
No, I think, but taking someone else into the meeting is a great idea, especially, it could be someone who you're kind of co-opting the authority of in some way as well. Like you could bring in someone senior, you could bring in someone who's already raised VC money, like a founder, and just kind of say, this person's advising us, could they come along to the meeting? Or just constantly interact with those people and ask them questions just to make sure, they could even ask the VC themselves, or you could get their advice on how to kind of frame those questions.
Cool, thank you. Rob, what's your advice before everyone heads off to hear their keynotes?
I'm just trying to think of something not been said so far. It slightly builds upon Czech's point. It was a stat actually that stayed with me from, I think, the first panel from Mark from UK Black Tech, and that absolutely shocked me. The figure of 0% of tech leaders in this country, the sort of from a British BAME background was absolutely staggering. And I don't know, over the last year or so, I've sort of reflected on this and hopefully become a bit more enlightened as a white guy and realising that maybe I am a bit privileged. I always thought from working class background, life was tough and, a single parent family and, my mum died and life was hard and I had it bloody easy. And I literally wake up in the morning, look at my phone and fall onto a panel like this without trying, and I think I've taken that to heart, and I think I've realised I've got some power and influence on this debate. So I don't think it's even worth saying in this audience. Everyone's enlightened here, but I do focus on a bit of a mini campaign around getting the guys to actually step up and play their part. So the very, very easy, piss easy thing I do, in fact, is say no to these manels, these all-male panels. So if every guy in the room could commit not to appear on a manel, that would be an awesome achievement. I think we can have a ripple effect. So, come on. But because, I mean, this isn't just a nice to have anymore, is it? It's a fundamental necessity now that the people shaping this technology are representative of all parts of society. It's in everyone's interests.
Yeah.
And there's just a final quote from our dear friend Maxine McIntosh, whose line we borrowed there. She said, if there's not, she used the phrase women in AI, but I think it's diversity in AI. We won't have AI that's representative of AI. In the case of this example she gave, therefore, women are negatively affected. If women are negatively affected, then they
people are going to
ill,
die.
and they die. If women die, we all die. So therefore, it's an interest.
Yeah.
Men have got it, got vested interest in this to join the party.
Yeah.
But I don't think this audience needs to know this.
No, it's exactly that. Doteveryone has shown us today there is not difficult to make sure that your event has got diversity at the core of it. It really isn't hard. I'm sure it was hard because I personally find it difficult, but it shows that it's possible. So thank you for having us. And yes, remember, so no responsible AI, we all die. No responsible tech, we all die. I hope you've taken some things away with you that help. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.